Today we're looking at Mark chapter 12, verses 18 through 27. So if you haven't read that yet, take a break and read through it and then come back to me. All right, we're looking at a passage that is really, what's pivotal about this passage is that we get to see which way Jesus leans when it comes to the religious groups of the day. Very often we sort of associate Jesus being anti-Pharisee, anti-Sadducee, anti-elders, if you will, anti-established religion. And the reality is I don't think that's the case. That I think Jesus is more of a, well, you're going to probably push back on this, a Pharisee than he was anything else. He was a rabbi, of course, but there were rabbis who leaned towards the Pharisee side and those who leaned towards the Sadducee side. And this is one of those passages where you get to see that very clear difference. And perhaps one of the reasons Jesus was so hard on the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but on the Pharisees, is because he in some ways identified himself along with what they believed. And this passage sort of shows that. If you read through the passage, you're going to find out that here, once again, they're trying to trick Jesus. The leadership is trying to, find a reason to take him out. And so they ask him this time, the Sadducees, who don't believe in the resurrection. They were the Orthodox, by the way, the Orthodox Jewish people. They were the ones who went back and said, well, the tradition says, and they didn't believe in a life after death. You died, you went to Sheol, which was not hell, it was just the place of the dead people, and that was it. You were done. You lived on, if you will, through your children, through your grandchildren, and so on. It was about that. It wasn't about your living on forever. And the Pharisees, on the other hand, do believe in the resurrection. And so Jesus is asked a question about what's called Levitical marriage. And the Levitical marriage is really, it goes back to the book of Leviticus. And the marriage is as if a guy marries a woman and he dies and he has a brother, and the woman doesn't have any children, because remember, women are property and they can't take care of themselves. Officially, they couldn't own property, even though there's a good bit of that in the Old Testament where women had a whole lot more going on for them than perhaps we want to allow for. But be that way, officially, women couldn't own property and so on. And it didn't work, generally outside the home. They raised kids. They depended on their families for sustenance, if you will, for their survival. And so if you married a son and the son died, then the brother, if there was a brother, had to marry her, and on and on and on. And so they wanted to know, the Sadducees wanted to know, hey, listen, if there's really a resurrection, that's what the trick question is obviously there's no resurrection, because clearly we're not going to have this guy, this woman being married to 25 guys. It was okay for a guy to be married to 25 women, but it wasn't okay for a woman to be married to 25 guys or whatever. So, they're trying to trick Jesus. And of course, Jesus then turns it on their head and says, yeah, you don't understand the resurrection, that, it's not about your relationships here on earth there, that it's very different, and you just don't get it. But then he goes on to say, but notice there is a resurrection, he says, because God doesn't say, I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but the living. And so they're sort of shut down. But again, for me, the real key is of course, it's great to hear there's a resurrection. We sort of count on that. But B is that Jesus self-identifies with the belief system of the Pharisees. And so with all that, you might want to just have a conversation. How does that change your perception of the Pharisees? And why do you think Jesus is so very, very hard on them if he identifies as being one of them? Hey, I'll see you next week.